The floor was cold that night. I remember that clearly. The way the wood pulled the warmth right out of my feet as I stood at the edge of the bed, the lantern burning low on the dresser, casting everything in a color that wasn't quite yellow and wasn't quite gold. My husband was already lying down, his back to me, the quilt pulled to his shoulder. He wasn't asleep. I knew the difference. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when two people are both waiting for the other one to speak first. I'm Rebecca, and this is Plain and Still, a space for stories that don't get told out loud. If something here finds you, I'd love for you to subscribe and stay. And if you've ever felt watched, not harshly, just carefully, leave one word in the comments. I read every single one. I am about to tell you something I have never said out loud. Not to my mother. Not to my sister. Not even to the woman who eventually became the closest thing I had to a friend outside May. I've carried this story for years the way you carry something fragile. Both hands, slow steps, eyes on the ground. But I've been thinking lately that maybe the carrying is the heavier thing. Maybe putting it down, even for a few minutes, is what I actually need. So, here it is. Here is what happened the 2 times I said no to my husband, and what happened after. In my community, there is no such thing as a private life. I want you to understand that clearly, not as a criticism but as a fact, the way gravity is a fact. We shared everything. Shared meals after church, shared labor during harvest, shared grief when someone passed, shared joy when a baby came. The ordinum wasn't just a set of rules. It was the connective tissue of an entire world. People knew when you were struggling before you said a word because they had known your face since you were 4 years old. That kind of knowing is a gift. It is also, sometimes, a weight you don't notice until you try to move. By the time I sat down in church 2 days after the second refusal, I already knew from the way Martha Yoder didn't meet my eyes, the way she shifted half an inch to the left when I took my place beside her, that it had already traveled. Whatever it was I had done, whatever word they were using for it, it had moved through my community the way water moves through soil, quietly, completely, leaving everything darker than it was before. I didn't know yet how it had happened. I didn't know yet what name had been put on it. That understanding would come later. But I am getting ahead of myself. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before that Sunday. The children were already asleep. The kitchen was clean. The house had settled into the particular stillness that comes after 9 o'clock in winter, that deep, absolute quiet where the only sounds are the ones the building makes, contracting in the cold. My husband came to the bedroom doorway. He stood there a moment. He didn't have to say much. We had been married 6 years by then. I understood what he was asking. And for the first time, without planning it, without thinking about consequences, I said no. One word. I didn't explain. I turned toward the wall. I want to be careful here because he was not a hard man. He had never once raised his voice to me in 6 years, and he did not raise it then. He went still in the way that good men go still when something surprises them, not with anger but with a kind of confusion that almost hurt me to see. Then he left the room. I heard him sit down in the front room. The chair creaked once. Then nothing. He was a man who had been taught, as I had been taught, that this was simply how things worked, that what he had asked was not demand but expectation, and that expectation was not cruelty but order. His hurt was real. His confusion was genuine. And none of that made my no wrong. Both of those things were true, at once. In the days that followed, nothing was said directly. That is the Amish way, correction through closeness, not confrontation. His mother stayed an extra hour at Sunday dinner. A neighbor, passing me at the store, mentioned something about how a wife's contentment was found in her home. Small things. Gentle things. The kind of things that, if you described them to an outsider, would sound harmless. But I had grown up in this world. I knew the language. I knew that each of these small moments was a stitch in a larger pattern, a soft, patient effort to guide me back to where I was expected to stand. I didn't say anything. I listened. I smiled. And I did not change my mind. I didn't know then that there is a word in our community for what I had done. Not a harsh word. Not a shaming word. A worried one. A word that gets said quietly between women, in the way that worried words always travel, gently, out of love, into every available ear. And worried, I have learned, is sometimes worse than harsh. Harsh ends conversations. Worried opens them into rooms with no doors. I would not hear that word spoken about me until much later, when someone said it to my face with such genuine sorrow in their eyes that I almost apologized, just to make her feel better. I didn't, but the impulse was there. That impulse, that old trained reaching for the shape they needed me to fit, that is what I have spent years learning to recognize. 1 week after the first refusal, he asked again. The way he asked was different this time. Softer. Careful. It was the asking of a man who had been thinking about it for days, who had chosen his moment and his tone with real effort. And it almost worked. There was a part of me, the part that had been shaped since childhood toward yielding, toward what the community called Gelassenheit, that beautiful, crushing word that means surrender to something larger than yourself. That part of me almost said yes just to stop the quiet heaviness that had settled over our house. But I didn't. I said no again. And I'll tell you what I said after. But not yet. I am ironing my Sunday dress right now in this memory, and the iron is moving slowly, and something is already in the air that I do not yet have a name for. The walk to the barn that Sunday morning was short. Maybe 200 steps from our front door. I had walked it hundreds of times, in summer heat, in mud season, in snow that came up past my ankles. I knew every uneven place in that path. But that morning I counted my steps without meaning to, the way you count things when your mind needs something small to hold on to. The air was cold and still. My breath came out in soft clouds and disappeared. I was wearing the same plain dress I always wore to service, dark and familiar, the fabric worn soft at the cuffs. I looked like myself. I felt like someone standing just slightly behind herself. Inside, the women took their side, and the men took theirs, as always. I found my place on the bench. Martha Yoder sat to my left. An elder's wife, a woman I had known since I was a girl, settled to my right. Neither of them said anything unusual. Neither of them did anything I could have pointed to and named. But the silence that lived between us that morning had a shape to it. I had sat beside these women enough times to know the difference between ordinary quiet and the quiet that holds something inside it. This was the second kind. They were not cold toward me. They were careful. And careful, in a community that is never careful with people it has no concerns about, is its own kind of message. It was weeks later that I learned exactly how it had traveled. My husband, and I say this without blame because he was doing what he had been taught to do, had gone to the bishop. Privately. For counsel. He was not gossiping. He was not punishing me. He was a confused man doing the thing that confused men in our community do. He brought his trouble to the person he trusted most to help him carry it. The bishop listened. Later, the bishop's wife mentioned it, gently, in passing, at a quilting circle. The bishop's wife sat beside my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law carried it home in her heart, where it did not stay quiet. By Sunday, my small, private no had passed through 4 sets of hands. Every one of them reaching out in love. Every one of them making the circle smaller around me. That was the thing I had to sit with, afterward. It was not malice. That would have been easier, in some ways, easier to name, easier to push against. What it actually was care. The system was not trying to hurt me. It was trying to correct me, gently, collectively, the way it corrected anything that moved outside its shape. It believed it was helping. It believed that bringing me back into alignment was an act of love. And here is what I have never quite been able to explain to people who didn't grow up inside something like this. A cage built by people who love you is still a cage. The bars are just harder to see. And harder, sometimes, to resent. After the service, the elder's wife touched my arm. Just once. A brief, firm squeeze, the kind that means something without saying it. Her eyes were warm. Genuinely warm. She had brought soup to my house when I had my second child. She had sat with me through a difficult winter 2 years before when grief came to our home quietly and stayed too long. She was not my enemy. She was a woman who had lived her whole life inside the same frame I was living in, who had never thought to question whether the frame itself was the problem, because for her, it had never needed to be. I felt her love in that squeeze. I also felt her message. I held both of those things on the drive home, turning them over in my hands, unable to put either one down. I think about a woman I knew, I'll call her Anna, from a neighboring district. We had met at a frolic years before, the kind of gathering where women come together to work and, beneath the work, to simply be near each other. Anna had done something different from what I had done, refused a different kind of expectation. But when her situation became known in her community, and it became known the same way mine did, through the same slow, careful channels of collective concern, the response was identical. Not anger, not shunning, at least not yet. Just the soft, steady pressure of a community turning its full attention toward the one who had stepped out of line, surrounding her so completely with its worry that there was no longer any air. She told me once, it would have been easier if they had been cruel. I understood exactly what she meant. If any of this finds you, if you have ever felt watched, not by people who wished you harm, but by a system that was absolutely certain it was loving you, I want you to leave one word in the comments below. Just one. Whatever word comes to you. I read every one, and I remember them.
Now.
The sentence I said after my second no. My husband stood in the doorway, and I turned toward him, and I said, I don't know who I am when I only do what I'm told. He didn't answer. He sat down on the edge of the bed, slowly, the way you sit when the ground has shifted under you in a way you didn't expect. We stayed like that for a long time, him sitting, me standing, the lantern between us making shadows on the wall. It was not a fight. It was something quieter and, I think, more honest than any fight we had ever had. 2 weeks after that Sunday, he came to me in the kitchen while I was washing dishes. He stood behind me for a moment. Then he said, I didn't understand. I'm trying to. 6 words. He gave me 6 words, and I have kept all of them. We were not fixed. Nothing was resolved. But something had cracked open just enough to let a little light fall through, and in a life where so much had always been sealed shut and certain, that small crack felt enormous. The plain dress still hangs in the same place. The floor is still cold in the mornings. But I stand in my kitchen now, and I do not wait for someone else to hand me back to myself. That is not a dramatic thing. It is not a victory speech. It is just a quiet, ordinary morning, and the fact that it is mine. You may not have grown up plain. You may never have worn a prayer covering or sat on a wooden bench while a community rearranged itself around a word you said in a dark room. But if you have ever said no to something, quietly, without an audience, without knowing what it would cost, and then felt the world shift its weight toward you in response, then you already know exactly what I mean. You have always known. You just needed someone to say it out loud first.